Each year, there are over 1 trillion pieces of fruit picked around the world by hand. Basically, every apple you've ever eaten has been picked by a human. In 1957, we sent the first rockets out to space. In 2022, we have robots that are capable of generating images of robots. This is produced by DALL-E 2. But we still haven't been able to commercialize autonomous picking at any level of scale. So my question has been, why have we been able to do all this, but we still haven't cracked this problem? And why is this possible today? Today I'm going to be talking to you about our journey at Ripe Robotics, about the advances in autonomous agriculture, and about the lessons that we've learned at Ripe Robotics. About 3.5 years ago, Hunter and I decided to start Ripe Robotics. At the time, Hunter was working as a software engineer developing eye tracking software for disabled people so that they could identify and play games with just their eyes. I was working as a consultant, advising some of the biggest companies in Australia on different areas of technology. Hunter and I were both passionate about artificial intelligence, and we believed that it would have a profound impact, like many other people here, on the world that we're living in today. So we wanted to create a company that was going to have a leading edge in that impact creation. So we started looking for different applications for artificial intelligence. We looked across logistics, across finance, across mining, and we ended up getting very interested in agriculture. That's because agriculture is one of the least digitized industries, and there is a huge opportunity for improvement. At the time when we started, no one had done any commercial harvesting of apples using a robot or any sort of autonomous machine. So we really wanted to work in an area that would create that impact. The other thing that stuck out to me was the problem. By 2050, our population is expected to increase to over 9 billion people around the world. In order to feed this population, we're going to have to increase food production by over 70%. And this is going to be very challenging. There's going to be increasing weather events and disruptions around the world. And so we're going to have to fundamentally change the way we grow, harvest, and distribute food. When we look at digitization across different industries, we see that agriculture is actually the worst performing on a digitization level, compared to industries like ICT, media, and others, which have very high levels of digitization. They've also had very high levels of productivity growth associated with that, and they tend to have lower dependence on labor. Agriculture is very undigitized, has relatively lower levels of productivity growth, and it's very labor dependent. But that means that there's a big opportunity for us to take the lessons from these developments in other industries and apply them to agriculture. When we look at the workforce as well, there's been a major decline over the past century and a half. In 1840, over 60% of the population worked in agriculture. Today, that's about 1.3%. There's been a significant decline, and every year farmers around the world struggle to find people to go and do the manual labor that needs to be done on farms. And of course, we're all well versed in pandemics today, and we've seen the disruptions that they create around the world. We all saw the supply chain disruptions, had to fight to get toilet paper and other goods like bananas and apples. And there was incredible amounts of loss due to this period. About 10% in New Zealand of their apples were unable to be picked because of COVID. And this equated to about $105 million loss around the country. And in Australia and the US, these numbers are expected to be significantly bigger as well. And the other thing is wage reforms. It keeps getting more and more expensive to hire manual labor, and less people want to do it. Australia, we had a major shift in policy this year, which is going to make big challenges for farmers around the country. And the thing is that historically shocks are not uncommon. We had major pandemics earlier in the century of last century with the Spanish flu, killed significantly more people than COVID did. But we also had wars associated with that time period. There was famines, and these sort of disruptions mean that you get a lot of challenges actually dealing with labor, because if you have a pandemic that means you lose your labor force and there's no alternatives, you end up having famines and other things that are associated with that. So it's a big problem, and we could expect to have more of these sort of disruptions in the future. And likewise, farm waste is also a very big issue. About 1.2 billion tonnes of food are wasted every single year. And about 15% of all food produced is wasted on farms, which is a significant amount of loss and inefficiency. And the farm total food waste accounts for about 6% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a problem that, if we can optimize this system more, we can have a big impact on the climate as well as on our population. So we really need to automate agriculture. Western growers represents over half of the fruit grown in the United States. They have a goal of automating 50% of their harvest of specialty crops in the next 10 years. For most of those crops, it's at about 0% today. So there's going to be a significant shift that needs to happen. They've kicked off the Global Harvest Automation Initiative, and they've selected us to be a key member in that. And this is one initiative to push this sort of development forward. What I see that is happening today is that there is a big shift in domestication, mechanization, and automation. There are three major phases of technological development in agriculture that I think are very significant. The first was domestication. When we started to domesticate plants and animals, we were able to create big levels of efficiency. Using oxen, using horses and different things on farms, we were able to plow bigger fields and increase our productivity by quite a lot. Then we shifted to mechanization. We moved from horses to horsepower during the Industrial Revolution in the 20th century, and this was able to see major productivity gains as well. But this was largely confined to traditional crops like corn, wheat, soy, and others. And we haven't seen as much of that development in orchards because of the complexity in harvesting these types of fruit. The other one is now obviously automation. We're seeing the automation era come to fruition today, and this is going to have a profound impact on these specialty types of crops. We'll be able to collect a lot more data. We'll be able to understand the depths of how these systems work at a level we've never been able to see before, and we're going to be able to solve many of these productivity issues through automation and digitization. Now, what I mean by automated agriculture is a number of things. Essentially, putting out autonomous agents that can think, observe the world, and act like a human does to solve key problems on the farm. This involves a number of key components. One is sensing the world around us, using cameras, using IoT sensors, and digital sensors to input data that we can use to make predictions about what to do. Secondly, we need to be able to understand that. So we can do that by using artificial intelligence models and algorithms to make decisions of what we should do on a farm. Thirdly, we need to be able to perform those actions, and this is often an area of key complexity, being able to actually decide what to do and how we manipulate the physical world around us. In agriculture, there are a lot of challenges in overcoming some of these problems. And fourth, we need to be able to have systems that can learn over time and improve themselves so that we can get more and more effective as we deploy these systems at scale. And Amazon's been really great at AWS helping us to understand the complexities of these different components and build out scalable systems using things like ROS and other architectural solutions so that we can deploy our robots at a large level of scale in the future. What I see as well is that there is a development of a number of types of robots across agriculture. On the one end of the spectrum, we have cobot systems that work with humans to increase productivity. So these sort of robots are able to take payloads from one area to another around a farm and drive autonomously. We have platform robots that are more like self-driving tractors and systems that you can attach various implements to, and they're able to perform a variety of functions across farms as a traditional tractor might. We have acquisitive robots, which are data collection robots, and a lot of the time these are performing functions that humans may not actually do today because it's so labor intensive. So being able to move very slowly through a farm and identify key pieces of information and give those insights to farmers is very valuable for the industry. And fourth, specialty process robots, which are able to provide really specialized services that may be done by humans today, complex tasks like harvesting. These sort of tasks often involve you to build an entire robot system to solve a complex problem. And it's important to emphasize the key technical challenges here. When we're comparing field robotics to systems that are in traditional warehouse robotics, there are some big challenges that you have to deal with. On the one hand, you have environmental conditions that are significantly more difficult than when you're out in a warehouse. That's because you're exposed to the weather elements like snow, extreme heat, wind, and other things. You have low levels of connectivity, so it's very hard for you to do traditional things with the low level of latency required in warehouse robotics and automation. But potentially this is changing today. There's also a lack of consistency generally, where you have orchards, layouts that are very different. In warehouses, you have very structured environments that you can create and control, whereas when you're on the orchard, you're exposed to a lot more obstacles and challenges organically. And fourth, you have other challenges such as lighting and vision that are much more difficult when you're out in the field. When we compare a grading system that traditionally grades fruit down a row in a warehouse, they often have very controlled lighting conditions that can take many images of fruit, whereas in the orchard, you have different circumstances when it's the morning or the afternoon or at night, and you have to account for a lot more data and a lot more complexity in building robust models to determine ripeness and other things like that. And in terms of the development of the technology, I'm still actually very optimistic, and there's a couple of key trends that I believe are changing this today. On the one hand, the number of Starlink satellites has been increasing significantly. We were one of the first to put our hands up to get this technology in Australia, and this has been enabling us to have higher speed internet in the middle of regional Victoria than in the centre of Sydney, and that is a game changer for field robotics. Likewise, AI vision precision has been increasing significantly over the past decade. In the past 5 years alone, there has been major jumps in the efficacy, getting up to human-level capability or beyond. And this is enabling us to do some profound things in agriculture. And likewise, orchards themselves have been changing and getting ready for this transition. Traditional orchard systems were much like the image on the left here, which showed that you had to reach around things that was very uncontrolled. And there are certain orchards that are still like this, but a lot of apple orchards are moving to more consistent layouts where you have thin rows where you can expose most of the fruit, and that makes it a lot easier to actually identify it and pull it off the tree. And this is because farmers have been expecting this sort of robotic revolution to come for quite some time and been investing in building layouts that could apply to automation, mechanization. And likewise, funding growth has been increasing. Over the past few years, we've had about 45% year-on-year growth in the amount of venture capital investment in agriculture. But it's not just the private realm. We also have the public investment, which has been increasing. We personally have received over 50% of our funding from public institutions like government grants, tax incentives, and other things. And then there's industry bodies as well who are specialised in solving this problem and have been dedicating resources to do that today. So there's money out there. It's often not enough, but it's still increasing as people start to develop awareness of the potential of this technology. So how are we automating orchards at Ripe Robotics? Well, to first go, I think we believe you need to understand what an orchard looks like today. At a very simplistic level, you often have a split between these modern orchard systems and a traditional orchard. You have very labour-intensive processes, so people go out and pick all of the fruit. They collect the fruit in a bag, then they deploy it into a bin, and often it gets damaged in that process. They also perform other functions on farms, such as weeding, spraying, and doing other things using tractors and other machines. The bins are generally collected and put into storage, where they can be held for, in some cases, 9 months for apples, for example. And if there are bad apples in that batch, that can actually damage the other apples in in the bins. And this creates a lot of problems for farms. They end up, in many cases, losing money because they're storing bad fruit. And then it goes to packing and distribution. But what we can see is this is a highly manual process, it's very labour intensive, and it's disconnected. So we believe it can be a lot better. Our vision for the future of orchards tomorrow is that they're going to be much more automated. You're going to have robotic systems that are deployed at scale. We see our role as being a service provider in key agricultural regions where we can provide fleets of robots to farmers and enable them to have the benefits of robotic automation with limited friction in adopting that. We believe that that technology is also going to be very different to what we have today because it will be digitally native. We will be collecting data as we deploy this technology. So instead of needing a human to input this data, we collect that and we're able to have a much more broad picture of what orchards look like in the future. And that will enable us to make better predictions and completely transform the way we do agriculture. We'll also see that there will be deployment of automation across different components of the supply chain, and it will be a much more connected ecosystem where distributors will have a better idea of what's coming down the line and whether there's risks that we could prepare for and in order to reduce the amount of waste in this entire system. And the other thing is that having satellite internet, 5G, is going to enable us to do this sort of high-level digital analysis at scale. So the value for farmers that we provide is really that we provide less damage with our picking systems. We're able to reduce the amount of damage that's caused to fruit. We're able to provide better insights using the data that we're able to collect. And we're able to produce better yields for the farmer at the end of the day so that they can do more with their farms. So how did it all begin? Well, as I said, we weren't roboticists when we started this company. We believed that this was an important problem to solve and we wanted to go about solving it in whatever way we can. So we started with this robot called Buzz, and it was a prototype proof of concept that we did in Sydney in a small shed. It was very simple. It was just able to rotate, go up and down, and it had a basic vision model that we developed. But we were able to prove that we could actually identify fruit on a fake tree that we had put there, and we were able to perform that task at a basic level. And this enabled us to get our initial amount of funding. Since then, we've developed 5 robotic concepts that we've deployed out into the farms. The first was Clive, and that was our first field-ready prototype, where we were able to demonstrate fruit picking autonomously. And we've continued to iterate as fast as we can to get to a model that is going to be commercially viable. And this is our newest version of the robot, Eve, which we've just deployed a few weeks ago out in Australia. And here's a video of our first field-ready prototype. This was Clive picking origins. So you can see that it was able to identify the fruit and pick it off the tree. It wasn't getting every piece of fruit, but it was able to prove that, running autonomously in the field, we could actually solve this problem. And that gave us a lot of promise in the further developments of what we could do. So the big developments that we've had are really in 3 key areas. One is in vision. There are some big challenges there. Manipulation is probably the hardest area to solve, and distribution. So in terms of vision, there have been major advancements, as I mentioned, in artificial intelligence over the past few years. And we've been looking at how we can use different components of this technology as it advances to solve different components of the task that we need to solve. So one is, key point detection, identifying where on a piece of fruit is the optimal position to actually approach it by. Using bounding box systems and models that are able to identify the fruit, but also even identify where the fruit should be when it's partially obscured. And this is important for planning and working out the optimal path. And then segmentation algorithms that enable you to do semantic level pixel identification of the fruit. And that can help you to do things like ripeness assessment, which can be very challenging in an organic environment. So the things that we've really learned here is that you need to be very flexible and constantly be on top of the literature to see where those developments are advancing and how we can continue to build in a way that allows us to adapt and adopt those technologies as they advance. The second area is manipulation. And as I mentioned, this is one of the key areas to solve. So we've developed some IP around, the suction tube concept, which was able to pull the fruit off the tree in a particular way, and it was able to mimic certain hand movements, because when you pick off different types of fruit, there are always idiosyncrasies that make it difficult. For example, with apples, you need to pull it without pulling the stem out, and you also need to do it without damaging. And often you need to pull and twist and do a pretty complex movement that a human finds quite easy. But with a robotic manipulator, you have to develop new types of systems to do that. And more recently, our most recent robot uses a suction cup concept, which has been used a lot in warehouse automation. We've definitely seen in the keynotes videos of robots using suction cups in warehouses. But we've had to build our entire manipulator from scratch, our arm system, so that we can move around, have a very small payload but a long reach at a good cost and a good speed. And to do this, we've had to develop quite a lot of different concepts here. And the other one is distribution. Once you pick the fruit off the tree, you need to be able to transport it without damaging the fruit. So we developed a distribution tube that was able to take the fruit at a very slow level of speed and cushion it the entire way through. And this was able to show that we could protect that fruit for farmers and ensuring the best quality when it gets to the bin. But we've also been using fruit conveyor systems more recently because they're used on picking platforms which are deployed, which basically carry people through them, and they pick fruit and put it on these conveyors to be distributed into the bin. And we know that that's a very tried and tested method that we've been able to sort of bolt onto our system and leverage that existing technology. So this is our most recent robot called Eve. So it can obviously go through the orchard. It's able to navigate some pretty rough terrain. We've had a lot of rain in Australia this year, and we were able to test it with some pretty bad conditions. And it's able to pick the fruit off the tree in a particular movement so that it can actually detach it without ripping off different parts of the fruit. And then it's able to move it all the way back to the warehouse as well to be deployed for the farmer. So yeah, this has been a big step from where we started with our initial prototype. And we've got a number of other iterations we're going to be doing over the next year, hoping to get to something that's really at a commercial level by the next year. So the lessons we've learned, there are so many lessons. It's about keeping your mind open and continually iterating. But a big one is investment. You obviously need money to solve this problem. And with hardware, with robotics, that's a very specialized area that some investors are quite afraid of in some ways. But it's finding those investors who really see the value of what we're doing, and we can push forward with them. And we've been really fortunate to have some big believers in us who have supported us along the way. And we're continuing to look for investment, not right now, but in the next few months to push us to the next level. Seasonality, we've been fortunate to be able to operate on multiple crop types, and this was really a strategic decision because operating on one crop type like apples means that you have a lot less time to iterate. You have to wait for each season, and that can be very challenging when you're coming up against funding and other things that you're trying to develop. So we've found that by operating on apples, oranges, and other fruit, we're able to get basically year-round utilization of our robots. And that's going to be beneficial for us when we deploy to key regions because it will help subsidize the cost of each of those different crop types. And the other one is expectations. Farmers have been promised the world and delivered very little for a long period of time. There's an ongoing joke in the industry where they say, robots has been 5 years away for 20 years. And I think it's managing those expectations with growers and making sure that they understand that there are big developments that now I really believe that this is possible, but being careful not to overpromise and underdeliver because that can really break trust with these key growers. And partnerships as well, finding key technology and commercial partners to work with. AWS has been incredibly supportive, but there's other organisations that have really been invested in us and pushing us forward. And I think this is critical to the success and development of companies like this in agricultural robotics. So in terms of our traction as well, we've got quite a lot of interest, which I think is a big thing for us to help us motivate to solve this problem. It's We've got over 75,000 hectares of growers who want to be using our technology who have reached out. And that means, it's really just putting our heads down and solving this technical problem to be able to deliver something meaningful to the market. And obviously, this is where we are now. We're still at our MVP stage. We've been pushing as hard as we can. But after this, we're hoping to get to a new model next year, deploy a small fleet that will be operating autonomously, then expand out in Australia and globally. And if you're interested in being part of that journey moving forward, I'd love to have a chat. And yeah, here's an image of our team as well. We're still small, but we're very ambitious. So if in the future we have some money to hire additional engineers and things, we'd love to talk to anyone who's interested. But this team has been incredibly hardworking, and we've pushed forward a lot in the past few weeks, especially to get this newest version of the model out and deployed on the farm. And finally, coming back to the beginning, 1957, we had that rocket go out to space. But for us to be a spacefaring civilization, we really do need to automate agriculture. Having a food system that's sustainable on other planets will require robotics, and it will require this technology to be developed. But beyond that, I think it is really possible today. And I'd love to talk to you more after this conference or at the party later on to learn more how we could work together. Thanks. Yeah, we can have, sorry, do we have, questions? Yeah.
So have you considered using simulation
Yeah.
to optimize productivity?
Oh, have we considered? Yeah, okay, so to repeat the question, have we considered using simulation to improve productivity? Yes, we definitely have. And we would like to. We haven't deployed that at we haven't really explored that too much. But after seeing the keynote today and what Amazon's doing, and having talked to you actually yesterday, it's definitely something that we want to explore more, because I think it has major benefits. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yep.
For your camera sensing solutions, are you using shortwave infrared or polarization techniques to grade fruit in? Or are you just using standard imaging?
At the moment, we're just using standard imaging, so we're using depth cameras to identify where the fruit is. We haven't used infrared for ripeness assessment yet, but we see that there's potential to add in additional functionality to improve the ripeness assessment, and potentially even have like a more sophisticated grader on the machine that's able to process that fruit and really understand its ripeness level even after it gets picked. Yep. So the question is about using damage detection to identify defects on the fruit. Yeah, at the moment, we've sort of got some initial models to identify defects, and we're just sort of continuing to build out the scale of that because, yeah, defect identification is important, even for just not picking a particular fruit that may have a major defect, or picking a fruit and being able to grade that on the machine to segment that. But yeah, that's something we're definitely looking into. Yeah. Any other questions? Yep.
You said that you're using a standard imaging system. So do you usually use the color features, or do you use the other features like textures? Because you said that you have to find the damage. So sometimes it's impossible to focus only the color features.
Yeah, that's right. And so in terms of we're building these deep learning models that take into account many different features. It's not necessarily just color. It might be shape. It might be certain attributes. So what we do is we work with experts, and we sort of go through the fruit and look at how ripe it is, or if there's any defects and things. And then we're able to label and grade that data and improve the quality of the models. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, no problem. Well, love to talk to all of you more afterwards. And yeah, thanks very much for having me.